most of the companies that were built in that mobile era weren't building smartphones. All the innovation was in the softwares, in the interface to these technologies, the sensors, the cameras, the internet, right? And so I feel like it's the same thing here. You're probably not going to be generating the next GPT, whatever, or the next DALL-E, the next Midjourney. And there are companies that are doing that. And so if you are doing that, you know who you are. For everybody else, it's going to be about the interface. What's up, you guys? Trying something a little bit fun. I'm calling this the Anti-Fragile Entrepreneur. And it's all about stories, lessons, ideas, information that's going to help you succeed in building a successful business from 0 to 1. I am Jason Shen, 3-time startup founder and executive coach to entrepreneurs and creative leaders. This is a segment called What's the Deal? We're going to talk about something that's big news in the tech world, in the startup world, and unpack what it means for entrepreneurs. Today, we'll be talking about generative AI. Generative AI is the idea that artificial intelligence can be used to create things rather than just analyze things. So this comes on the back of a couple different things that have been going on for a while now. OpenAI is a company founded by Sam Altman, funded by Elon Musk, a lot of money from Microsoft. And it has been building a series of models to do text and image generation. So they have GPT, and they just released this big chat GPT, which really got the internet going. 1 million people were using it in 5 days, which is extremely fast growth compared to even any of the most viral social products, because it just spread like wildfire. And it's primarily through the tech community, but it's now reaching a lot of other communities. So that's been happening. And then another thing that's been going on, OpenAI as well runs DALL-E, which is a image generation tool where you can type in a prompt, generate a lot of images. If you've been following the news, you've seen these, and you've seen the avatars and everyone styling their avatars. That's based on another open source model called Stable Diffusion. And Stable Diffusion allows anybody to train a system to learn like your face and then model your face in a bunch of different ways. All of these things have been happening around the same time. It's been getting the tech world talking. Let's unpack what's really going on here and why it matters. For a long time, the joke was that AI is really just linear modeling or very basic algorithms. And essentially, the joke was like, whenever you hear a founder say, oh, we're powered by AI, the VC would be like, yeah, okay, unless you have a PhD from MIT or Stanford and got some super secret sauce, you're not really doing AI. You're doing some really basic stuff. Maybe you've been handwriting some stuff. There's really a person in the loop. I remember one of the companies that one of my friends worked at back in 2011, 10, 12. This is 10 years ago, was called Aardvark, and was supposed to do what Google couldn't do, which is answer questions like, what's the best sushi restaurant for couples in San Francisco, right? Think back a while, this was not super obvious and not super available. And they said they had figured out a way to do that. And it was supposed to use human-based search. So you would identify people in this network of products, of people using this product, and it would ask them, hey, wants to know about best date ideas. Can we ask you, or do you know someone you can ask? And there's a whole system that was supposed to navigate through this tree of like information that people had. And you guessed it, there's actually just a person on Google Chat running this. It was not necessarily a real AI. And eventually they used that to raise a Series A round of funding, which back then was like $4 to $6 million. Now we would call that a seed or whatever. Then they did build some interesting technologies, and they were bought, I believe, by Google. Success in the end of the day, $50 million exit, which again, at the time was like not bad. You might have an AI powered like analytics tool, and you'd say, hey, we noticed that there's a cluster of customers who have this kind of these traits and shop in these ways, and maybe you should do something about it. So the best they could do is find patterns and present those patterns to you, and then say, think about doing something, or maybe we hand target them, do something more with them, right? Or whatever. But now with this generative AI, it really takes it a step further by saying not just here's a pattern, but actually here's actual information, right? You see so many interesting applications here of doctor diagnosing their patient using some of the medical history, and that's very impressive. You've got them taking the bar, you've got generating drafts of scripts. I've seen some really interesting movie ideas that have come out of this just by, it has history checks. You could ask it to modify what it gave you. If it wrote something, say, make it more scary or make it more professional or make it shorter or turn it into bullet points. It could do all those things, put it into a table. It's also very good with code, which I think gets a lot of technical people very excited because it can write code in different languages. It's not always right, but it's often close. And it makes sense because you've got these programmers who are building this AI for kind of themselves or the things that they understand. And programming, certainly there's a large corpus of code out there. Sometimes it's documented, sometimes there are descriptions about how the code works. And honestly, it feels very magical because programmers understand how hard it is to write code. I've written a very small amount of code in my life, and I know how hard it is. So it feels truly like magic for even technical people, right? You think, oh, I'm super smart, my job won't be affected. And then you type in some commands and you say, write a algorithm that can call some API and generate these things and manipulate them. And boom, it does it, right? Not perfectly, not every time, a fair amount of time. And it's only going to get better. That's the thing that's really scary. For all the people who say, oh, boohoo, it's not that good, or it's wrong a lot of the time, or it's not very creative. Bruh, this has only been around for a few years. You don't think it's going to get better? I watched this video of Sam Altman talking in 2019, and when he's on stage and this woman's asking him, like, are you planning to make money? What is your revenue strategy? And he basically said, look, we don't know. We have no idea. We're just going to keep making this thing better. And we told our investors that one day we will ask it to tell us how we can make money from it, and it will give us the answer. And a ton of people in the audience laughed, and he acknowledged, look, it sounds ridiculous, it sounds stupid, but that's really what we're thinking. 3 years ago, he said that. Now, in 2022, the product is still free or very low cost, but it is captured the attention of everyone, and nobody is wondering now if that's plausible. I think it's much, much more plausible than it was 3 years ago. And a bunch of these companies, okay, let's get into the applications for founders. Like, how should you think about this? What does this mean for you? And what lessons can we take away for you? Hey, if you're enjoying this so far, obviously subscribe to the channel, but also check out my newsletter that I publish every week on these topics and more. So the first is that there's two paths now. You've got these companies that are developing these models. Some of them are developing them in-house. Meta, Google, they have their own proprietary internal ones of different levels. OpenAI is one big commercial one. You've got others that are like open source and who's maintaining them. I think there's more being done with Stable Diffusion on the image side that people seem to be using. I haven't seen too many applications of these open source large language models, but these two ways of going about it. You either are building these models or like directly creating, manipulating these models, which is pretty challenging because, again, they all have teams of researchers who are working on this. So it's very hard to like advance the core model, and the core model gets better all the time. And so there's even this question of whether or not it even makes sense to try to train it for a specific situation, like training it for medicine, training it for finance, because arguably the advances that we're seeing are so strong that even your sort of tinkering around this edge, it's just going to get replaced by the next version. Okay, so then it becomes really about the interface and how easy is it for an individual to actually come in here and use this. For a long time, OpenAI had this GPT playground, and you could make a free account, log in, and type some things, and press submit, and it would generate things. But there was something about the chat interface that really works, because the chat has memory, but really what the memory is just taking everything you said before and stuffing it into the original prompt, which you could have done as a regular person using the playground, but it's awkward. It's a strange way of interacting with a technology. And so I don't think people really understood to do that. And yes, they've updated the model. It's at GPT-3. They're saying that ChatGPT is not 4. It's not GPT-4, the sort of like system that they're running, maybe 3.5, call it 3.5. And again, the point is that interfaces really matter. So you see some of the companies that have succeeded. Jasper.ai raised like $135 million off of the back of an experience built on what I believe is GPT-3. They're not the ones running the models, but they've made it possible to generate ads, to generate social media copy. And you think about the next steps of publish, right? Okay, write a series of tweets for me. Already pretty cool, but then you still have to copy and paste those tweets into the thing. So if you could say, write a bunch of tweets for me, press enter, it's been scheduled. That's that layer of interface usability. And so the second lesson is like this, there's a lot to be learned from the mobile smartphone era when smartphones started to emerge and people started getting smartphones. What was exciting about that was that everybody has a camera. Everybody has these real-time location sensors, internet in their pocket. And so most of the companies that were built in that mobile era weren't building smartphones. Apple was building smartphones. Google was building smartphones. Microsoft was trying to do some stuff with smartphones and not successful. And other companies tried to do stuff with smartphones, not successful. You ended up having these two major smartphone creators. All the innovation was in the softwares, in the interface to these technologies, the sensors, the cameras, the internet, right? And so I feel like it's the same thing here. You're probably not going to be generating the next GPT, whatever, or the next DALL-E, the next Midjourney. And there are companies that are doing that. And so if you are doing that, you know who you are. For everybody else, it's going to be about the interface, right? How can you tie this powerful, incredible technology and actually meet people's needs where they are using software, using hardware maybe. People are generating like children's books where they take pictures of your kid and then they generate a cartoon image and then they generate stories and then they print the book. It's the wrapper, right? All the wrapper. And the wrapper sounds, I don't know, weak or minimal or whatever, but it's a big deal, right? Wrappers are important. Just because you have technology that can do something doesn't mean people will be able to experience it unless you build the bridge of the interface. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for great front-end designers and programmers to create these interfaces, people who think about experiences, right? That is going to be a big part of what makes companies that leverage generative AI successful. I do think that detecting when you're looking at generative AI is going to be really important. And being human is going to be really important, because the problem with the generative AI is that it doesn't really know what's true. It just spits out a bunch of things and seems very confident in it. And sometimes it's wrong. Now, obviously, there are things you can do even in the prompt to say, be as truthful as possible. And if you don't know, say, I don't know. So those things can work. And I'm sure the models will get better at providing confidence intervals. But the problem is not everybody's going to use that when you encounter text online now. You have to be a lot more suspicious than you've ever been, because you don't know if this is generated by a computer or a person. Why does it matter? People can be wrong, right? But the difference is that people stand behind, what they write typically. So if you are a real person, you don't want to just be spewing out nonsense, because you'll lose credibility. You could make up a fake person, which means it'll be important to know if profiles are real, if a writer's and the name on the thing, is that real? But wanting to know what's human generated and what's computer generated is going to be important. Someone mentioned that in the GPT system, they do try to do some watermarking. And I think this has something to do with n-grams, which is like how frequently certain words appear in typical writing. And so they skew it in certain directions to try to identify if a large body of text was generated by GPT. But not every model is going to do that. And then you could modify it and then scramble it a little bit, and then you lose that. So there is going to be a bit of an arms race where you look at trying to be ahead of the detectors, and then the detectors get better, like spam, hackers, and other types of security systems. So we now have this new arms race, which is, are the words you're reading real, which is a computer generated? I think that's going to be important. I think being very human is important. So none of this was written by an AI. I'm talking too fast to read off a script, frankly. People just aren't, unless you are like a professional telecaster, you're not able to actually just like read off text super fast. And I don't know, I wouldn't do that. But there are companies that are trying to generate avatars and make videos seem more realistic. But I think it's just going to be a lot harder to make a face look realistic, and like you're not gonna be able to generate that very easily. So I'm gonna have to start inserting ridiculous things like that to just make sure that you know that it's really me. I really recorded this in a real room, in a real location. This is information coming out of my brain. So we are entering a pretty strange world, but it's exciting, right? This is the future. We've seen like a lot of lack of sort of groundbreaking innovation for the last couple of years. I feel like crypto really tried to beat that, wanted to beat that, but 12 years in, there just hasn't been anything significant that has like actually changed the world. And I feel that this technology has the potential to do that. So those are my 3 takeaways on generative AI and why it matters.